All right, so here's the thing. The book goes into in chapter 13, they start talking about weightlifting belt and spotting resistance training exercises. I don't think I really need to belabor the point on some of this stuff, but I definitely want to hit just a couple of the finer points. I don't need to show you pictures of weightlifting belts and some of the spotting techniques that they espouse, but there are some takeaways that you need to know for the tests, as well as the certification exam, and also just in terms of weight room etiquette and just my philosophy. So this is only like 4 slides for this presentation, so let's get it done. So the weight belt, the whole reason why you wear a weight belt is to help increase the intra-abdominal pressure. You're adding pressure by cinching up a weight belt nice and tight. And the idea is you're increasing that intra-abdominal pressure, which helps reduce the actual compressive forces on the vertebral column. So it kind of makes sense that we're talking about exercises that might be compressive to the spine, right? So when you look at this, you go, you're not trying to use it for like a bicep curl or a tricep push down, though you'll have people who perhaps they have a back injury or some kind of issue that they have to wear a belt all the time. But the thing is, if you wear a belt all the time without doing any like rehab work for your midsection, what ends up happening is almost like your body becomes dependent upon the dang thing. And the muscles of the low back and the abdomen become so deconditioned that you are fully dependent upon using a weight belt all the time, even for just like being upright walking around, which is silly. Those muscles can handle work like all day long. They are very much tonic. They're on all the time. They work to help keep us upright, and you just have to use them. So they provide some basic guidelines. They state that, for use on ground-based structural exercises that load the trunk, things like squat, front squat, push press, standing shoulder press, things that are overhead. And they also advise that within that context that it should be used when performing max or near maximum loads for exercises that are ground-based or structural in nature. If the exercise does not load the trunk, then you're not going to use a belt. You actually, to the point I was making earlier, you don't want to use a belt so you get the midsection to be able to respond even in the slightest micro sort of ways, to be able to respond to just movement, as opposed to constantly being cinched with a belt. And I cite an example that I saw just this past week where I was in the gym and there were a couple pretty beefy dudes in there throwing some weights around, and they were doing lat pull down, just regular seated lat pull down with a belt on. And I'm not trying to be critical. Perhaps there was a back issue there, but these two gentlemen were clearly experienced in working out and strength training. They were pretty buff dudes, and they're wearing belts to a lat pull down. So you just think about the dynamic of that, where it's not compressive at all. It's actually distracting. It's actually pulling up on the spine as opposed to compressing. So what gives, right? Like, why are you wearing a belt? And I wasn't going to ask them. I'm not going to get into their business. But concerning the way the book presents this, that would be nonsensical to do a lat pull down wearing a belt. In essence, what you're doing is weakening the midsection. All right, so spotting. And I say this all the time. I say this in every class, and I even say it to my athletes. Like when you talk about spotting begins with good program design. If you have your client who's brand new to working out and you ask them to do like heavy triples or heavy doubles the first time you work out together, then frankly, you need to find something else to do. You're not programming your athletes or your clients for success. You need to have good program design that prescribes, if you will, or designs in, or programs in proper rep and set combinations where your client can actually do their workouts. And perhaps when they get to rep number 9 or rep number 8, they need just a little bit of help, a little bit of guidance. Perhaps they need to find that groove that they kind of fell out of. There's a little bit of a sticking point. That's good spotting. Rep 1, set 1, and their chest is getting crushed by a bar on a bench press because the weight's too heavy, forget it. That's the wrong weight. That's the wrong programming. So, spotting itself begins with good program design and knowing when your clients or your athletes are probably going to hit that fatigue curve and being ready for that moment. And, spotting in general is used primarily for safety first, right? We do this to help keep people out of peril, whether it's an overhead exercise, as they note to the right, or something over the face, which I'll get to in a second, or you get towards set number 3, you're deep into your reps and you're trying to force out another rep or two. Absolutely appropriate. That's part of what spotting is used for. Even something as simple as like our friends doing lat pull down, if you want to work eccentric loading, perhaps as a spotter, you're helping them on the way down on the concentric phasing, and then you're letting them work eccentrically slow and steady on the way up. Help on the way down for a 2 count, they go up 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, 4. So you're working the eccentric side, but you're helping them on the concentric side. So, it's another forced repetition type of philosophy that you can use with spotting. With spotting, whether it's the NSCA or if you take the USA weightlifting certification for Olympic weightlifting, which we snatch and power clean, holy smokes, power clean and snatch. With those exercises, because of their explosive nature, they're too dangerous to spot. And really what you have to do there is on the front end is you have to teach your athletes how to miss correctly. So if they go ahead and try to do a snatch movement, you've taken them through the teaching model that's espoused by the United States Weightlifting Federation. And you do a snatch movement and they miss out in front, we teach our athletes to throw the bar away from them out in front. If they over rotate, if you will, and they're too far under the bar, then we teach them to step forward and drop the bar behind them. And it's quite okay. They're rubber weights, we're on rubber flooring. It might make a little bit of noise, but it's better than blowing out a shoulder or injuring oneself because you're trying to control a bar. Just you throw the weight under control is how you learn what you learn how to do. So for free weight exercise situations that do require a spotter, something overhead, shoulder press, something over the face, like a bench press, with a bar on the upper back, squat. With a bar positioned on the clavicles, you're doing like a front squat with a bar across the shoulders. Yep. And the one thing I want to point out is in the book, they show a picture of this where there's this gentleman spotting somebody who's doing a dumbbell bench press. And the NSCA espouses spotting at the wrist for overhead and overface exercise. And I think it's an incline press. They show the person grabbing the person's wrist. And I will tell you, in 25, dang near 30 years of coaching athletes and training clients, I have never once grabbed somebody's wrist to spot them. And you'll never get this wrong on a test because you'll remember my statement. I've always spotted at the elbows because I've always known that I've had good program design where I don't have to grab the person's wrist to control them. And I've led them on a path towards small successes in terms of the programming, as well as when they actually go to perform a dumbbell bench press. I know the weight is appropriate, the rep range is appropriate, and they might need just a little bit of help on perhaps a rep or two at the very end. And I can offer that just at the elbows, or even I've done that. I'm sure somebody's going to poo-poo me on this, but even on the heads of the dumbbells, because as a person's tracking, you might see that the person starts to track inward towards their chest. And I've just gently done this and pushed their hand back out, on the head of the dumbbell to put them back in their groove. And it gets us to a whole nother point that I haven't noted yet. When you talk spotting should be on the order of ounces of assistance, not pounds of assistance. It should be just like a feather light assistance, a feather light touch to be able to help somebody through a sticking point like that. Now, granted, if somebody has a complete catastrophic failure and they've put too much weight on, they've asked you to spot them, and they get buried with a bar, that's a different animal. But if it's programmed out correctly, there's familiarity with the exercise, there's been a learning curve leading up to the attempt that you're helping spot on with that person, the magnitude of assistance that you'll give in that scenario will be ounces of help, not pounds, not ever. All right, guys. So, let me get myself all the way here. I'm going to get off my soapbox with that. They note this, and I definitely agree with this, is that the authors state there should be good verbal communication with spotting, but I'm going to tell you the verbal communication happens before the actual attempt. And if you have a lifting partner, you already have a repertoire between you and you already have good verbal communication in place. But what is the liftoff on? On 3. Okay, we're going to hoist the weight. Do you want me to follow you? No, don't follow me. Just let me do it with a free bar. Fine. When you need help, do you want me to just yank it off your chest? No, just a little bit of help. You might have to just put me in my groove. That's it. Those are real simple things you can kind of talk through when you're talking with your person that you're working with. And then becomes, okay, if I get buried by the bar, yeah, yank it off me. That's a failed attempt. Um, I would say that you also need to have in place, like when you're talking squats, I often have to talk to my athletes about them racking the bar afterwards because oftentimes they try to do this. They do their squat, they get to the last rep, and they try to put one in one stirrup and one in the other stirrup, and they end up missing, and it's a disaster. As a spotter, I put my hands literally on the bar and I walk with them in and I push them in towards the actual hooks, and that way they're physically against the hooks. And then when they drop down, it just goes right in the J hook that's right there for them, for the bar. So, those are the kind of things you have to talk about on the front end and kind of go over and set that expectation with your lifting partner so you're on the same page. With the actual content that's in this chapter, again, much like the other chapter, I would urge you to go back in and take a look at some of the stuff. I only have, 4 presentations on this. And if you're somebody who's in the gym environment, a lot of this will be familiar. You get better at having like a discerning eye, and you get better at picking out like, yeah, that person knows what they're doing, that person doesn't. That person has way too much weight on, that person doesn't. You get better at picking that out. And then when somebody asks you for a spot, it's completely within your right to set some expectations and have that conversation on the front end and say, all right, I've never spotted you before. Do you have any preferences or anything in particular you want done? Let me know, and let's go ahead and make sure we have this dialed in so we do it right. All right, guys, have a good one. Moving on to the next chapter. Thanks.